Okay, Boker Tov. We will get started. Whoever joins, joins. Um, I decided to do this on Zoom because of the weather. When I made the decision, it was pouring, and I don't want people to have to walk out in the rain. And although they may have the option to go on Zoom, anyways, this way everyone doesn't have to feel like, oh, I really should go in person, even though I prefer this class in person. Okay. Anyways, so we're going to get started and get my stuff set up here. Okay, do a screen share. What I want to do is I want to take a look at the next Mishnah again. We just kind of really briefly ran through it last time. Read it, and then give a biography of Rabbi Yonatan, who was in the prior Mishnah, and Rabbi Meir in this Mishnah. And I decided I was going to wait till this week to do both of them. The one for Rabbi Yonatan is short. The one for Rabbi Meir is extensive because it takes us into other areas of his life. And whether we get back to Mishnah today or not, we'll have to wait and see. But so much of his life and his interaction with his former teacher informs very strongly on the Mishnah that he composed. And we also should know more about him because he is so extensively quoted in the Mishnah. So with that little introduction, let's take a look at the Mishnah. This is chapter 4, Mishnah, somewhere around 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, whatever your versions are. It starts Rabbi Meir Omer. Rabbi Meir Omer, hevei mima'et be'esek. A person should limit the amount of time he spends in business. In other words, he should work the amount of time it takes him to make his parnasah, his income, but he doesn't have to go overboard. V'asok b'Torah, and then the rest of the time he should be able to free himself up to learn Torah. V'hevei shval ruach bifnei chol adam. He should be humble before all people. And what that means is that a person who has a lot of knowledge, someone might be a Talmud Chacham, a person who has a position of importance, don't get full of yourself. You always, like we've seen before, that who is considered wise, someone who can learn from anybody. And even if someone taught you just what an aleph looks like already, you owe them a debt of gratitude. So don't, and with this concept of being a shval ruach, we've seen multiple times already. A person should exceedingly be humble of spirit, because again, in the grand scheme of things, who are we in the face of Hashem and the Torah? The bitalta mina Torah. This is now a psychological kind of a statement. Im batalta mina Torah. If you did neglect Torah, now, it says here in English, you shall have many who bring you neglect to it. What does that mean in normal English? It means that the more things you find to keep you away from Torah, the more things that are going to show up to keep you away from learning. One example, and again, I don't want to get too much in depth now because we're going to go back to this whole Mishnah, but just to understand the basic idea, let's say you're going to sit down to learn something. You said, oh, you know what? I really should first do X. Then once you do X, then Y comes along and Z comes along and A and B and C. So the more you procrastinate, this is really about procrastination, there will be more things that pop up. It means that we've seen already in the prior Mishnayot that a person needs to not just be a Kovei 18 to set aside Torah time for learning, but also has to get into the mode that when they're learning, that's what they're focusing on. But on the flip side, if you did spend time and you studied and you labored, it says over Torah, Hashem has lots of reward to give to you. So when a person is a lot into procrastination and putting off learning, it snowballs. There's more things that you'll put off that you'll find that cause you to put off even more the time of Torah. But on the flip side, which is that if you do spend the proper time learning, and each teach or her own level of ability, then Hashem has a vast amount of reward to give you as well. Okay, so that's the Mishnah that we're looking at now. Let me take it. I don't need to take this on the screen share anymore. Tov. So what I want to do is I want to talk about Rabbi Yonatan, who was in the prior Mishnah, which we talked about last week, or the Mishnah last week, is a very brief biography of him. And then we'll talk about Rabbi Meir in depth. So Rabbi Yonatan was a Tana time of the late 2nd century. Okay, we're talking, of course, the Tanaim are after the time of the destruction of Beit HaMikdash. And he this is his only Mishnah he's mentioned it. But as far as in other areas, in Tosefta, Halach, Midrashim, he's extensively quoted. He was a colleague of Rabbi Yoshia, whom we did not hear from yet. They're very often, like you hear Rav and Shmuel, as far as Amoraim, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Lezer, you hear all these different groups or pairs that have disputes. So his what they call Baal Plukta, the person he argued with most, was man named Rabbi Yoshia. And they're quoted quite a bit, again, in halachic discussions, in the Sifrei, in Midrashic works. What he was known for, and which is why he becomes fairly well known within Midrash, is careful analysis of psukim, looking into them in depth, dealing with drashot on words, on nuance. The Midrashic, there are two very, very generally speaking, there are two types of Midrashim. There's Midrash Agadah, Midrash Halacha. Midrash Agadah are stories, for the lack of a better word, lore, legend, stories that whether they're meant to be mashal, parable, or they're meant to be taken literally, each one on its own. But Midrash Halacha is part of the basis of Halacha. So much of what he wrote ends up becoming part of Halacha. And he participates in many of these discussions in the Batei Midrash in the second century that become part of the developing framework that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi redacts into the Mishnah. And that's why I wanted to mention him only together with Rabbi Meir, which we'll see why soon. But to keep that in mind about Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, who's the author, the editor of the Mishnah, the author, the fact that much of Rabbi Yonatan's ideas do find their way into the Mishnah. We'll see how that connects to Rabbi Meir in a couple of minutes. And his opinions, though, are definitely mentioned in the Gemara. It's not like he just doesn't exist at all. They're mentioned, but it's as far as like having a Mishnah in his name, this is it. Even though he was not very prominent, and like names that you've heard of Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Meir, and others, nevertheless, like I say, many of his rulings, which we find in Midrash Halacha, do play an important role in what Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi came to conclusions as far as Halacha in the Torah Shebe'al Peh time period of refinement of Torah Shebe'al Peh, which again ends around the year 200-ish, through Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi writing the Mishnah. But what I want to talk about, and again more at length, because it's really important to understand who Rabbi Meir was, is to talk about Rabbi Meir, who was probably one of the greatest Tanaim. Remember again that the Tanaim are the rabbis at the time of the Mishnah, which is like basically the time after the destruction of Beit HaMikdash for a couple of hundred years. The rabbis in the Gemara are known as that time period called the Amoraim. So we're talking the Tanaim. Was probably one of the greatest Tanaim of the generation. And the interesting thing is that his name is his father's name's not mentioned anywhere. Possibly, Gemara Gittin tells him maybe descendants of Gerim, of converts. I don't want to get into the discussion right now, but interestingly enough, the Gemara also gives him an alternative name, which is Nehorai. If you know anybody with the name Nehorai, which means, well, it doesn't make a difference what it means, but he becomes known as Rabbi Meir, the Gemara says, because he enlightened, L'ha'ir is to enlighten, from the word or, to enlighten the eyes of the sages. In other words, this little discussion I just ran through about his name is to get to the point that he was not only known for his brilliance and his knowledge of Torah and his understanding of Torah and his wisdom, but also how he was able to L'ha'ir, to enlighten other people with his knowledge. He was one of 5 students, maybe 6, who were the disciples of Rabbi Akiva, who survived after the whole issue of the 24,000 students, i.e. 12,000 pairs of students of Rabbi Akiva, who died over a period of time. So he was one of 5 or 6 students left. That left a tremendous, I don't want to use the word burden, but weight, responsibility on the students of Rabbi Akiva to continue after. Before he studied with Rabbi Akiva, though, Rabbi Meir was a student of a man named Rabbi Yishmael. He also studied under a man named Elisha ben Avuya, who we're going to come back to. Elisha ben Avuya, who eventually becomes known as Acher, who goes off the derech, as we would say nowadays. He actually goes off the deep end. But we're going to come back. I don't want to jump ahead to that because I want you to understand that the people he learned from, whether it was Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yishmael, originally the Elisha ben Avuya, who he learned from some tremendous Gedolei Torah, people who we can't even begin to understand their greatness. He had a rare ability to take whatever came into his life, whether it was a person, a situation, a halacha, to really get to the meat of the matter, to get rid of what was like the external, and to really focus on the person or the issue, and deal with what came before him. The majority of his Torah came from the Akiva, and therefore there is a statement in the Gemara in a few places that Stam Mishnah Rabbi Meir. I'll explain what that means. The Mishnah often will say, Rabbi so-and-so says this, Rabbi so-and-so says that, but if it doesn't say a name, it just says a statement of fact, then that is called a Stam Mishnah. Not that the Mishnah is Stam, we don't need to know it. It means that it's not named with an author or opinion. Generally speaking, it's Rabbi Meir. And how he was transmitting it from what he learned from Rabbi Akiva. Now, that's why I'm mentioning that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who did the Mishnah, wrote the Mishnah, he put in individual rabbis who may appear, there are plenty of them that appear only one time, and then he weaves in the opinions of so many other rabbis, but it gets to the point where there's one who was so prolific in his teachings, i.e. Rabbi Meir, that it became known. You just said the Mishnah, and everyone understood it was Rabbi Meir. It wasn't necessary to put that down, that it was he was the author of the Mishnah per se, or the statement. And again, Rabbi Meir was very close to Rabbi Akiva. When Rabbi Akiva would travel abroad, Rabbi Meir actually would follow him, so he would be able to learn Torah from him. There's actually an unusual halacha that whether it was ever put into practice, I have no idea. And we know that there's an idea, what's called an ir miklat, that an individual kills somebody by accident. In the time of Beit HaMikdash, there were cities of refuge that the person who killed by accident could run to protect himself, because technically the next of kin of that person killed could kill the accidental killer. It also says in the halacha that if the person runs to an ir miklat, to city of refuge, that his teacher has to go with him. Notice, assuming he has a Rav Muvhak, a teacher from whom he learns all his Torah, has to go with him in order to continue teaching him. So the connection between rabbi and student ad hayom hazeh till today is a very critical, important factor. He was ordained when he was fairly young with Smichat Chachamim by Rabbi Akiva, and he early on in his life is already being seen as this tremendous, tremendous giant. The Gemara says in Eruvin, I'll just read it to you in English, is clear and known before the one who spoke and created the world that there was none like him in his generation. Meaning the Gemara itself at Eruvin extols the greatness of Rabbi Meir, that he would be able to uproot mountains with his reasoning. What made him so great was his logic and his reasoning. And sometimes it was so deep that people couldn't even understand what he was saying, which doesn't mean it wasn't good. And now you also, if you're a leader, you have to be able to get the message across. But not everything that was being promulgated and taught and learned was the purpose of making halacha. Sometimes it's, what they call in English, biblical exegesis. They use that in a conversation one day. What we would call like parshanut. He was known in the Sanhedrin. He had the rank of Nasi, the Chacham, which is kind of third in line. There was the Nasi, the Av Beit Din, and the Chacham. And Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said that had he merited to see him from the front, he would become even sharper. What does that even mean? That he was able only to partially, truly appreciate only a certain level of Rabbi Meir's knowledge. He was also very big in the area of Agadah. Remember, the Gemara has two major divisions. They're all mixed in, but two major approaches. One is halacha or discussions of halacha. One's agada or agadata, which are stories, lore, legend, history, medicine, arithmetic, science, all these things. And it said that it said in the Gemara in Sanhedrin that Rabbi Meir had 300 parables just on foxes. So it says that at the end of Sota, the Gemara, that when Rabbi Meir passed away, the people who could truly produce tremendous parables, they declined, passed away with him, because there was no one who was as adept at doing something of that nature. But again, when it came to the parables, because of some of his high level of knowledge and his intricacies, it wasn't always easy to understand what he was trying to get across. He did have a tremendous love for the land of Israel. Gemara Brachot said that his statement was that the land of Israel lacks nothing. That's true. What are we lacking? What are we lacking here? There's a Gemara in Masachet Shabbat in Yerushalmi. Actually, just a minute. I'm pretty sure I even highlighted it when I came across it the first time. Second, find it real quick. See if I brought Daf Tetem out. I want to. I'll tell you what it is in a second if I don't find it real fast. But I think for all of us, this is a really important statement. This is Mishne. Hey, that's 3. That's solid. Give me 1 second. No, it's not right here. Okay, I'll just tell you what it says in the Gemara. I will eventually find it. It's an amazing statement. Rabbi Meir said that whoever lives in the land of Israel and eats his food, keeps kosher food, speaks Hebrew, and says Shema morning and evening, is assured of the world to come. Notice what he put in there. Talking in Hebrew. That is such an important connection to the history of the people, to the land of Israel, to the Torah of Israel. And that's what his goal was to this is a couple thousand years before Eliezer ben Yehuda. He also said that whoever lives in the land of Israel receives a kapara, receives a form of atonement from Hashem also. That doesn't mean you can do whatever you want, but I would assume he meant, I hope, that when you make aliyah, that just like standing under the chuppah, you have a new life that begins and you get kaparat avonot, you get a clean slate. So too when you make aliyah. So it's yet another reason for people to make aliyah. Later in his life, Rabbi Meir was forced to run away from the Romans. And again, he didn't have an easy life near the end. We cannot forget that he had a wife who was an extraordinary woman named Bruria. I actually only know one Bruria in my life. She was the daughter of Reb Chanina ben Tradion. If the name sounds familiar, is he was one of the 10 martyrs. So he married Bruria, who was a very powerful individual. I'm talking physically. Well known, she's quoted, she's very strong, very knowledgeable Bat Torah. And it said that the Gemara tells she learned 300 halachot from 300 different rabbis in one day. And very often there are halachic rulings in the Gemara that are even cited in her name, which is obviously very unusual in the Gemara. And the Chachamim said the pasuk of Eshet Chayil Nimtza that Shlomo HaMelech had intention for her. Well, that doesn't mean it was, but it's using that as he obviously had it in mind for my wife, but that's okay too. So instead, the idea is that it's trying to show us the importance, the strength, the level of education that Brewery had. Now, I want to first let me just give a little tiny summary. He was called Meir because he illuminated the eyes of the Chachamim. He was one of the builders of the Mishne, one of the bricks, so to speak, in the Mishnah. a master at halacha, a master at agadah, a lover of the land of Israel, and truly also with all that, a model of humility. He was also known as a very humble individual. But there is one other thing we have to take into consideration when we talk about Rabbi Meir, and that has to do with his relationship with the man named Elisha ben Avuya, who was his teacher, who eventually becomes known as Acher. He doesn't have his name anymore. He's just known as the other one. So I'll talk about him for just a couple of minutes, because all these pieces of what Rabbi Meir did in his life and his interaction with Acher all come along now. We'll see when we go back to the Mishne in a few minutes, or a couple of minutes, how it impacted what he wrote in this particular Mishnah. So this man, Elisha ben Avuya, was a tremendous Talmud Chacham. There are a couple of things that happened in his life. If we had a long time, I'd read the Gemara. I'm going to read only a short paragraph in a minute, but there are the stories that happen. It says that how he tried to encounter Hashem through Pardes, through Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Sod, to start learning more of the secrets and delve into the Torah differently. He came out a changed person. He witnessed a couple of things. He said, how can this be what Hashem meant? And this isn't Torah anymore. And basically, he became a kofir. He rejected Torah. So you might think that a person who was as great as he was, who goes ahead and rejects Torah, that he would just like do his best to forget his Torah, to put away Torah, to not do anything. But the Gemara tells us an interesting story. That after this has happened, he is riding on his horse on Shabbat, and he comes by the Beit Midrash where his student, Rabbi Meir, is giving a drasha on Shabbat morning. Someone comes running up to where Rabbi Meir is standing at the podium, at the stender, and the bima, and he said, your teacher's outside on a horse. So he went out to greet him. Now, right there, you have to understand the greatness of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir very easily could have said very simply two or three things. First of all, hey, dude, I'm in the middle of a talk. Number two, he didn't ask to talk to me. Number three, if he wants, he can put on a kippah and come into the shul and talk to me here after davening. But he doesn't do that. He leaves in the middle of his speech. And they have a discussion. He and Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Elisha ben Avuya have this discussion about what was the talk about. And interestingly enough, that Rabbi Meir said one thing and Elisha ben Avuya interpreted it a different way. And they start walking and talking. And they get to a certain point, and Elisha ben Avuya said, Meir, you have to go back to the Beit Midrash. He said, why? He says, because I've been counting the steps my horse has been taking, and we've reached the Tchum Shabbat. On Shabbat, you're not allowed to walk out of the city more than 2,000 amot, about, let's say, 3/4 of a mile. Let's say a person wanted to walk from Malei Adumim to Yerushalayim. So if there's no housing along the way, it's just open area, you can't go more than 3/4 of a mile on Shabbat outside the city. If you have two cities next to each other, you go from one to the other, that's fine. But he's telling his student, Rabbi Meir, listen, you got to go back. What does that mean? Not only Elisha ben Avuya, known at this point already as Acher, and we'll see why in a minute, was he still with his great knowledge, but he was also dealing with a halacha, telling a student he didn't want him to go against, which is called Tchum Shabbat, which is dirabanan. It's not doraita. It's not minat Torah. And he's still trying to get a student to do the right thing. He doesn't want him to. He doesn't want to be the cause of his student, Rabbi Meir, messing up. There was still a love between the two. Why is he called Acher, meaning the other? Because the Gemara decided it doesn't want to make an example of somebody who was such a great tzaddik and such a great individual who throws everything away and say, look, at least he had that. Because yes, from Hashem's perspective, again, he'll get rewarded for everything he was doing. But on the other hand, you didn't want to, you could do everything to make carry of him and try and get him to be religious again, but in using modern terms. But it was important for us to understand he was in a different category. He was Acher. He actually heard a bat kol, a heavenly voice that said, he himself heard that everyone has a place in the world to come, except Acher. He can't do tshuva. Whether he did or didn't, whether he was able to get into Olam Haba, is not my asik at all. But I want to read to you, where do I have it? Here. Okay. The Gemara tells an interesting story I'm going to read to you. says as follows: Ki nachnashe de acher, when acher died, Amri. So the heavenly court made a declaration. Lo meidan lidayine, he should not be judged. Lo la alma da'ate lete, and don't let him be brought into the world to come. Lo midan lidayine, what does that mean? He shouldn't be judged. Mishum da'asak ba'oraita, because he did occupy himself with Torah. No, don't judge him because look what happened, but we got to kind of turn a blind eye because he did learn Torah. But and on the other hand, don't let him come into the olam haba. Why? Because he sinned, and not only did he sinned big time. So what happened? Amar Rabbi Meir. So Rabbi Meir declared, he said, Mutab it is better that he be judged. Let him go before the heavenly court like everybody else. And then maybe after that, he will be brought to the world to come, to olam haba. Matai amut, and Rabbi Meir said, when I die, I'm going to request of heaven that be, I'm going to request of heaven the following. When I die, I'm going to request of Hashem that smoke should come out of the grave of Elisha ben Abuya as a sign that he'd been sentenced. And when Rabbi Meir died, smoke came out of the grave of Acher, as it were, was trying to show that he had gone to Gehenna. And even someone like that would be able to get to Olam Haba after they're cleansed. Now, this is what's called Agadata. That's why I'm partially reading it for you. In Agadata, we have a general idea that something's not almost ever taken literally. It has a lot of meaning behind it. There's a commentary in the back of most Gemaras called the Maharsha. He comments both on the Gemara and on Agadata, the stories. There's a separate set of books called the Ein Yaakov, which deals with the Agadata, not all, but many of it from the Talmud. And again, you look at some of them, like, what were they smoking? Like, what are they thinking? But again, if you read some of the stories, the lore, the legends, and just look at them as is on the surface, you're missing a lot. There's a lot of to mean that actually smoke came out of his grave. I don't know. But it's not for us. It's not for me to know or to not know. There's a point that's being made there. What's the whole point of that Gemara? That Rabbi Meir felt that to deny his teacher Olam Haba just outright, with no judgment, no going for the heavenly court, was not right. Maybe somehow he would be entitled to it. To say judge him, therefore to judge him, and God can make the decision, the heavenly court make the decision where he's going to end up. And we'll learn from that. We'll understand from that you might think that his tremendous amount of mitzvot could outweigh what he ended up becoming at the end of his life. It didn't, according to this midrash, or this Gemara. Okay, so in a nutshell, that is the story of Rabbi Meir. This, like I said, there's so much more to be talking about with Rabbi Meir, but I'm not going to get into that at this point. What I do want to do is to go back now to talk about our Mishnah that we were talking about before. I guess I'll put it back on the screen so you can have that. Let's see what this says. Berea, yes, Judy. Berea was Rabbi Meir's wife. That is correct. Yes, I thought I made that clear, but it's not. Thank you. We get the. Where is it? Here it is. Okay. We have the Mishnah back on here. I'm going to talk about this Mishnah for a few minutes now. I want to be really clear that this Mishnah does not say don't work. The Mishnah does not say don't get a job. The Mishnah does not say don't get an education. The Mishnah does not say take care of your family and their parnasah and their income. It doesn't say that. What it does say is don't go overboard. It starts off by telling us minimize the amount of work you have to do. And there's an old line I heard, it's not original. I'm sure you've all heard it. No one lies in their deathbed and says, if only I had spent more time in the office. No one would ever hopefully have that perspective. But the point Rabbi Meir is making at the beginning of this Mishnah is the idea that we have to spend the amount of time necessary for a living wage, and then we have to take our focus and put it where it really belongs, and that is on Torah to the best of our abilities. it seems like a simple idea, right? Very well-known idea. We've seen this in previous Mishnayot. We've seen previous chapters. The obligation to study Torah. The prior Mishnah of Rabbi Yonatan talking about, if you're basically saying whether you're poor or you're rich or whatever it is, you have to study Torah. We already kind of know this, and even Rabbeinu Yonah writes these words to in multiple places, quoting Shammai, when Shammai said a famous line, "Aseh Toratcha keva," make your Torah kavua, meaning set fixed time what you're going to learn. Person says, "I have no set time, I have nothing." So fine, simple solution. You can find, everyone can find 15 minutes in a day, a half hour a day, an hour a day, 5 minutes, whatever the amount of time is, that you are going to dedicate to Torah. We've talked about this before. If you're, and you should try to do it when you're most awake. So maybe there are morning people. I'm a morning person. I'm not a night person at all. So a morning person. So maybe I'll do more of my learning in the morning than I might do in the evening. And maybe someone says, you know what, my sharpest time, whatever it is, don't set yourself up for failure, which is the second part of this statement. When you delay and delay and delay, you say, okay, I'll do it now, but you know that that's a low point of the day for you, or I'm talking about your circadian rhythm, or you're talking about you decide to learn somewhere where there's going to be tons of distractions. You've already set yourself up for failure. So the novelty, what is really the novelty of Rabbi Meir is trying to tell us? Two possibilities. One is the scarcity of time devoted to Torah. It's impossible to really get truly in-depth knowledge of Torah when you only spend a few minutes on it. Now, as a person, let's say they learn Parshat Shavua, and that's their whole Torah for the week. It's great. I mean, it's something at least. They learn every day. They learn one Aliyah. Today they did the Chamishi Aliyah of Parshat Tetzaveh, and they went over that. Great. If they spend 5 minutes on it, they're going to know the words, they maybe know a little bit what I was talking about, but may not necessarily remember anything. No commentary from Rashi or Ramban or English or Art Scroll or some way, and they walk away. So it becomes like I'm doing it just to be Yotzei. I learned something, which again, there's some efficacy to it, but it's not the same thing. Again, when you relate to Torah as you might relate to a spouse or to a child or to a sibling, to someone you love, to a really good friend, you want a surface relationship, or do you want more in depth? True learning for any area, you have to think about that. A person who wants to be a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, a computer analyst, the list is endless. If you have a shitchi, or kind of like a very limited surface knowledge of your field, you're not going to be very successful. I remember, and I'm not making this story up, in 1982. I worked for a company for 17 years in purchasing. And part of my early responsibilities was the computer system. And computer systems were still very, very in their infancy. I'm talking about, if you know what I'm talking about, they had the discs were like round platters, like 4 or 5 platters, and you had to put them in the machine and spin it and put it in there. So we were going to do an upgrade to the system. And it was my responsibility to call the company, to ask the guy to come out to do an upgrade. He sat down at my desk, and I'm not making this up. He's kind of slunk, down in his chair like this, put his head like this, and he said, I think I know how to do this. Now we're about to put our entire computer system in his hands. And he was serious. I think I know how to do this. And Besofo Shador, he'd screw it up. He did. But imagine you walk into your doctor, and the doctor said, oh, I'm pretty good at orthopedic stuff, but your problem is I didn't go to those classes, but come on, I'll take care of you anyways. I don't think you're going to go to that doctor. It's true for any learning, and even more so than therefore when it comes to Torah. When a person says, you know what, I'm going to make that decision. I'll still do my job. I have to do what I have to do for my income. But at the same time, I have to give and dedicate time for Torah based on all the other Mishnah we've talked about before, but now adding this layer of a little bit more in depth, minimizing the amount of interruptions or procrastination. That makes a big difference in the amount of the person is going to be able to understand. And it's not just about the amount. It's not about the quantity only. It's also about the quality. There's this constant friction, so to speak, not literal, between people who want to learn more and more and more stuff and people want to learn more and more depth of what they've learned. I'm more in the category of I like to learn as much as I can, and I get to the depth if I can. But I'd rather learn 500 pages of Gemara than 2 pages of Gemara for 5 years and just know every single meaning of every single commentary. That doesn't do it for me. And as they say in Hebrew, yesh v'yesh, which really means there is and there is, but it means to each his own. So to feel the depth, the sweetness, the connection to the Torah, it can't be an afterthought. It has to be part of the priority. Again, this is part of his points. And things that are more of a temporal matter, if you spend your time only on that, acquiring and making money and buying and spending and purchasing and making more money and more money, you don't leave a lot of room for Torah. Another possible reason that this Mishnah, Rabbi Meir, who is this great genius, gives us what sounds like a very simple, straightforward instruction that we've already heard. No worthy study of Torah can truly coexist with excessive preoccupation with affairs of this world. What does that mean? If you are very preoccupied, we'll use a Mishnah we talked about months and months ago. I think it's Pirke Bet. The more stuff you have, the more worries you have. A person who has a shopping cart, who lives on the street, God forbid, and their worldly possessions are in a shopping cart, when it comes to their worries, are minimal. Where's their next meal? How are they going to survive in the street? I'm not minimizing their worries. They're massive. But they don't have to be worried about what happened if the stock market went down. What happens if someone broke into their house? What happened if did they pay their life insurance? Did they pay for their homeowners insurance? They don't have those worries. The more you have, the more concerns you have. Doesn't mean you have to walk around worried all the time, but it means there are more concerns in life. So some people just don't have the peace of mind. I can tell you personally, I can sometimes sit down to learn. I have very specific times. I try to sit down to learn every day. And there are times I have things on my mind. I forgot I have to prepare this, I have to do that, whatever it might be. And my head's not in the game. And it affects it. I just close. I make a mark where I close it. Because what am I going to do? Just read it. It's not going to do anything. So the more you are able to give priority and say, imagine you said the following statement, the opposite. Someone comes to you and says, listen, if you'll stay 3 more hours, you get X amount of overtime. And with that, you're going to get, you'll be able to buy something you wanted. But you had already committed on a kavua basis that's the time you are learning. And you say, look, I know that's worth it. Do I need that money? Is it something that's extra? I don't need it. And the Torah comes first. That's a tremendous statement because most people will very quickly do the opposite. They'll say, oh, you know what? I can always learn later, but I can't do those 3 hours of overtime later. I'm going to do that now. And again, I'm not saying anything negative to someone who decides that to do it, but it's just where your priorities are. If the person needs that money, then that has to come first because they have to finance their family. They have to do that. Another way to look at this question of what is Rabbi Meir really telling us here, there's a commentary known as Tiferet Zion. He says that this Mishnah is actually addressing people who are wealthy, not the average person. It's people who have a lot of money. And they spend their money to support people who learn Torah. There's something called the Issachar Zevulun partnership, where one learns and one pays. So let's say, for example, I have a lot of money, and I say I'm going to support one guy learning in Kollel, or I'm going to support one guy who's not even in Kollel. I'm going to support him so he can learn. Okay, that's a tremendous thing to do. That's like fantastic. It goes back to the 2 tribes, Issachar and Zevulun. One went out to do business in the sea, and one would stay home and learn, and the zechuyot of the learning would help with the other. But that person does not have, this person who has the money, who's supporting the kollel or supporting an institution or a family, does not have the right to say, I don't have to learn. Don't say that, because you might think the more you expand your business, the more money you have, the more you can help the kollel people or whatever the person is. And that's true, but at the same time, you cannot exchange your support for the kollel or the individual at the expense of your own Torah. Meaning they have to go hand in hand. They have to both be taken care of. So this one, but I would say is a bit of I don't know, is my perspective, maybe an extreme opinion of this particular commentary, that the Tana is saying to these people, leave your business and busy yourself with Torah, which I have a hard time with personally, because if that person is supporting Torah learning, there's already a big, gigantic benefit. And maybe if he leaves his business, he doesn't have money to support that person, maybe that person is going to end up having to do other things. So again, I want to make one other comment, and that has to do with Kollel in general. We as a people, as the Jewish people who learn in Kollel, people who spend time at Torah Uminato, his job, quote unquote, is his Torah, is critical. We need people learning Torah. Without Torah, we're done. But again, taking into consideration all of our current events and everything else, there has to be a particular level to which we say X amount of people, and the rest really need to go and serve the country. I'm just talking right now today in generic terms about supporting people who want to sit and learn. It is a huge, huge, huge mitzvah to support somebody. Let's say Mr. X, he would like to sit and learn, okay? But he can't because tachlis, he's got to go out to work. So someone says, listen, I'll tell you, you sit and learn, and I'll give you X amount of shekel a week so you can learn. You go do a little bit of work, maybe get a part-time job, but you really are into Torah, you can sit and learn. This chuyot to that person, helping that individual, enabling that individual to sit and learn Torah, are vast. But again, it shouldn't come at the expense of the person who, in theory, if he can learn, at his expense. And the words of the Mishne here of Rabbi Meir are somewhat maybe of a conclusionary statement of what Rabbi Yonatan said in the prior Mishne. Before the prior Mishne, he said, whoever keeps the Torah from poverty will eventually keep it out of wealth. Wealth and poverty don't depend on the amount of time a person puts effort into it. I hate to tell you, you could spend 500 hours a week at work. You could spend 2 hours a week at work. I'm obviously exaggerating a little bit. And you're going to end up with what exactly Hashem has planned for you to have. That's the way it works in this world. You can spend 5 hours in Torah. You can spend 200 hours on Torah. There is a massive difference. It's a massive difference because every minute of Torah is another level in your life of building your neshama up. So therefore, Rabbi Meir says in our Mishnah, be busy a little bit. You don't have to go crazy with your job. Don't waste all your time worrying about your daily life and income. Unless of course, chas v'shalom, a person's in a hand to mouth situation. And then as much as possible, busy yourself with Torah. Okay, so I'm going to stop here. Next week is already after Purim, so Bezrat Hashem will get together. Hopefully back in person. For those of you who came in late, I said at the beginning that I did not want. I'm sorry to have made that last minute change, but while it was made this decision, it was pouring outside. I want people tracking through Rhonda and Martin's house, and also to make people feel they had to come out in the rain. And I didn't say it in the beginning, I don't think. So maybe I did. I don't remember. So today's learning was the Ili Nishmat Avigdor Chayav ben Rachalea Mer Tzvi. Shama should have an aliyah and continue to soar. In the meantime, wish you all Shabbat Shalom. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Rabbi, so much.